I welcome you to the regular meeting of the Salina City Commission for October 8th. We'll have a call to order and the roll call, please.
Mayor Ryan.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hay.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick.
Here. If you are able, would you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Awards and proclamations. We have one.
Item 3.1, the week of October 7th through the 13th, 2018 is Fire Prevention Week in the city of Salina. Troy Long, Fire Marshal, will read the proclamation.
Mr. Long.
Good afternoon. City of Salina, Kansas Mayor's Proclamation. Whereas the City of Salina, Kansas is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Salina, and whereas fire is a serious public safety concern both locally and nationally, and homes and the locations where people are at the greatest risk from fire. Whereas fires killed 2,735 people in the United States in 2016, according to the National Fire Protection Association. And fire departments in the United States responded to 352,000 home fires. Whereas the majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occurred at home each year. Whereas the fire death rate per 1,000 homes reported to U.S. fire departments was 10% higher in 2016 than it was in 1980. Whereas the Salina residents should identify places in their home where fires can start and eliminate those hazards. Whereas working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in reported home fires in half. Whereas Salina residents should install smoke alarms in every sleeping room, outside each separate sleeping area, and on every level of their home. Whereas Salina residents should listen to the sound of the smoke alarm, and when it sounds, respond by going outside immediately to the designated meeting place. Whereas Salina residents who have planned and practiced home fire escape plans are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive a fire. Whereas Salina first responders are dedicated to reducing the occurrence of home fires and home fire injuries through prevention and protection education. And whereas Salina residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their home. And whereas the 2018 Fire Prevention Week theme, Look, Listen, Learn, Be Aware, Fire Can Happen Anywhere, effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Therefore, I, Carl Ryan, Mayor of Salina, do hereby proclaim October 7th through the 13th, 2018 as Fire Prevention Week throughout the city, and I urge all the people of Salina to be aware of their surroundings, look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency, respond when the smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately, and to support the many public activities and efforts of the Salina Fire and Emergency Services during Fire Prevention Week 2018.
Yes, I do. Are there any specific activities or?
We have multiple station tours that will be going on actually throughout the month. We're doing on the calendar this week, we are doing 3 Meet the Firefighters, and that's kind of a neat activity. We go to several of the preschools, and the firefighters go out and talk to them and then get dressed in all their gear, and so they can kind of see them and learn what they look like and not be afraid of us. We're doing a safety day at Ace Hardware on Wednesday from 10 to noon. We'll be talking about smoke alarms and different things like that there. And then I'm doing a talk at a nursing home.
Great, good. Do they get to wear the scuba stuff? The kids would love that.
Oh, yes, they would.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief Rouse. Citizens Forum, is there anyone that would like to address the commission under the Citizens Forum?
Deborah Corrales, 124 East Charlotte. I know at this point my words will not bring Vanessa back, but commissioners, you have already proven you never cared. Nobody but Ms. Hodges spoke up and said, "This is wrong." There's never a good time when you see something wrong happening to keep your mouth shut, ever. You should always stand up for the person that's being wronged. And I want to tell you how wrong it was. September 15, 2014, my special needs daughter called me and frantic, found our dog dead by the back door, and I was in Texas at the time. And Vanessa, after hours, went out, calmed my children, and picked up my dog and handled him with love and respect. That's how wrong it was. Above him, it had to be 8 o'clock before that woman got home. She didn't know me, never talked to her, didn't even know she was the supervisor out there. And now all we have is inappropriate soccer goals that nobody wanted at a cost that we didn't need to spend. And I've heard that through this whole thing, you went to lunch with the guys that the grievances were against 2 days after you accepted her resignation. Did you ever go to lunch with Miss Vanessa?
Yes, I took her lunch.
During the, well, I didn't mean take her to lunch, but
No, I took her lunch on
during the
occasion.
proceedings?
No, I don't think that would have been appropriate. The reason...
But it was appropriate to go out with him 2 days after she resigned.
Ma'am, I was actually taking the interim supervisor out to lunch to help find out how she could be supported in her role.
58 pages of grievances, and you had to go to lunch and discuss it. From what I've seen in the past 2 years, current leadership at Parks and Recs has done nothing productive, but instead has cost taxpayer money, caused unrest with the citizens, and cut many programs and funding, and only pursued projects that their kids would benefit from, like soccer fields and baseball stadiums. Why is this acceptable? The entire Vanessa case aside, I don't think highly of the current Parks and Recreation leadership, and I think the city of Salina and its citizens would benefit from their resignations. I'm probably the only one with the guts to stand up here and say it, but there's 1,000 more just like me. But now they fear retaliation. And as I understand it, the courts always have appeal proceedings, so if you think you were handled unjustly, you can go through the appeals process. So I still don't understand why you needed to call his boss and ask any questions, Bruce Moore. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Kraus. Are there others that would like to address us?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Marcy Moberly, and I live at 300 East Wayne. And I want to address several items today regarding what I and many other Salinans view as a toxic and untrustworthy leadership. I'm extremely concerned by the actions of Interim City Manager Mike Scragg. Having a city employee, even when unable to get legal advice, after 3 attempts to do so, he called Bruce Moore's boss in an attempt to try to intimidate and silence Bruce. Bruce Moore is an invaluable volunteer at the Salina Animal Shelter and has shared publicly what city employees Schrag, Cotton, and Gary have done to Ms. Cowie to ensure her removal as the animal shelter manager. This call came within days of Schrag's comment to Ms. Cowie that he did not know what to do with or what to do to Bruce Moore. Trying to whitewash this outlandish behavior at the last commissioners' meeting was terribly unsuccessful. As the adage goes, in times of adversity, people expect you to react in the same way they would have reacted if they were in your shoes. meaning Schrag assumed Bruce would be biased and retaliatory if he were given the opportunity, because that's how Schrag would have reacted in the same situation. Now, I'm just a grandma and a caretaker of my disabled husband. So my little bosses, they really don't care what I have to say, as long as their tummies are full and they get to play. And my other boss spent 32 years in the military with multiple deployments to ensure I have the right to stand here and share my opinion with you today. So I think I'm in the clear. I think. And if that sounds facetious to you, you need to understand that your citizens are now mentally saying something very much like this to ourselves before deciding to share their concerns with you. Maybe that's what you're hoping for. My understanding of our city's government is we, the citizens, are your bosses. We share with you, the commissioners, how we want our city to be. We share our ideas and disappointments, and you are tasked with making our ideas come to fruition and also with fixing the problems. You have instead ignored a major debacle and created a sense of distrust. You have deepened the resentment towards the city as a whole by its residents. The most despairing reaction last week, in my opinion, was Mayor Ryan's comments about Schrag calling Judge Moore's boss. Mayor Ryan, you said, well, I think he, Schrag, did the right thing to look into that on behalf of the city's organization. When I was a young man growing up, it seemed like doctors and attorneys and people that held positions of judgment, even us as city commissioners, are up here are held to a standard to when you need to be involved in certain issues. I don't know how you could not draw any other conclusion but to wonder if we were going to get the same consideration when we appeared before Mr. Moore. I think, Commissioner Hodges, you are trying to reverse the tables on us. It's Moore's, obligation to decide, his responsibility if he's overextending himself or not. I would first like to point out that should you have had a workman's comp case, it would have been presented in front of Judge Moore, a man doing his job. The opinions shared by Mr. Moore are representative of a man who gives selflessly to his community through volunteering at our shelter, working shelter events, and even fostering the endless stream of kittens that come through the shelter doors. He is the cat guy at our shelter. I've never known Bruce to be anything other than honorable and forthright. I'm sure the Department of Labor was shocked by the audacity of the city of Salina to contact them regarding Judge Moore's code of ethics due to him speaking out about the atrocities he sees within his city. So odd was this request that it took multiple people to figure out to figure out just who was up to what. My second thought, Mayor Ryan, I'm sure you realize that it's not the 1960s anymore, it's 2018. And people are able to have different ideas, religions, races, sexual preferences, etc., that wasn't acceptable back then. That doesn't change the way these people behave in their professional life. One can speak their mind and go through the correct channels to achieve changes that are necessary in our city. Thirdly, Commissioner Hodges was asking the questions that I and many other citizens of this city wanted answered. And I'm sure Mr. Schrag would not have contacted Judge Moore's boss again had he known how the light would finally have shined right back on his own ethics. Once again, assuming someone would behave in a retaliatory fashion when given the opportunity simply because they had the fortitude to stand up and speak their mind publicly against you says way more about you than it does the person you're accusing. Furthermore, Mr. Schrag stated last week, from his vantage point, the public comment portion and Vanessa Cowie's personnel matter had run its course. That statement alone tells me that he has no real intention of listening to the citizens of Salina, and that our opinions just don't matter to him. I can assure you, Mr. Schrag, this is very far from over. You've done more than anger a bunch of animal lovers. You've made it obvious that we all need to become seriously involved in our city's government. Something this egregious can happen and you feel it's no big deal, then sir, you are not the man for the job of neither the interim city manager nor the city manager. I also have great concern with the fact that the spouses of our city employees and elected officials are posting and sharing details of private personnel information regarding Ms. Cowie. If it was not okay for you, the commissioners, to speak to us about Ms. Cowie during her termination process due to personnel privacy issues, how is it okay for these spouses to be posting on the internet? I want to share a Facebook post that was written on September 21st of 2018 by Penny Hall Cotton. Her post reads, "I work with some pretty amazing people. I appreciate my friends that stayed neutral through this whole personal issue," I think she meant to say personnel, "between the city and one individual. Our family loves and supports the animal shelter as a whole. You find out who your true friends are in situations like this. Out of all of my friends, I can only say one let me down, but that isn't any of my business. It's just a lesson well learned. Once again, I love and appreciate each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for the hugs, food, drinks, and just letting me vent through my tears. I love Salina and working with such beautiful and incredible people in Salina." And there's a couple of noteworthy items in this post. Thanking people for standing with her and letting her vent through her tears. Venting about issues she should not have had details to vent about. No longer being friends with one person because they disagreed with her as she vented these details. It seems highly unprofessional of her husband to have shared this information with her, not to mention opening the city up for a lawsuit for this personnel information to be shared with others. The comment I would really like to talk about is the one where Ms. Cotton states that her family loves and supports the animal shelter as a whole. I mean, for gosh sakes, I would sure hope so. Her husband's the director of the department. Why would there be any question of her loving the shelter or not? I mean, the shelter gives all their help to the neediest of our our animals in our city. So that brings me to a story that I feel is vital for you and our citizens to be aware of. This is a true story, and it's been shared with me from various sources, volunteers, citizens, and city employees. This story is about a dog named Otis. Otis is a young, purebred Italian Mastiff who was found loose in Oklahoma by a friend of the Cottons. This friend saw the stray dog and thought Chris might want this dog, so he reached out to him, and indeed, Chris did want this lost dog. So on 10/20 of 17, Chris messaged pictures of the dog to Vanessa and told her he was going to get this dog from Oklahoma. Vanessa asked him if the dog had been taken to a shelter in Oklahoma to see if this purebred young dog was somebody's baby. Maybe it had been microchipped and someone was heartbroken that he was lost. No, Chris didn't do that. No, he wanted this dog, and he was going to go take it. Now, we all know that Chris is the director of the Salina, Kansas animal shelter. And at this time, Salina's animal shelter was so full of animals that Ms. Cowie was driving dogs out of the state on her days off, not being paid, to make sure these animals were able to live. But Cotton went to Oklahoma and brought a dog to our city. On the 25th of October of 18, Cotton messaged Vanessa and tells her that his wife Penny has changed her mind and Otis has to go. It was Wednesday, so Vanessa asked him to bring him in the next day so they can get him neutered on Friday and get him up for adoption on Saturday. Otis would spend minimal time in the shelter that way. Later that night, he messages again and says, "Wife changed her mind. Otis can stay." Lucky for Otis, his family's going to keep him, right? Sadly, no. 2 days later, on Friday, 10/27, Cotton messages yet again. Otis was most likely acting out, like a confused dog that had gotten lost and been basically dog-napped and brought to Salina, Kansas. The message this time was wife changed her mind again. Poor Otis, he must not have been worth the trouble. Well, the shelter was already closed for the day, so Vanessa let him know that. The shelter would be open at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. But now poor Otis would have to sit in the shelter until Tuesday to be neutered. It would really be better for Otis if Cotton would wait until next week. There was no reply. Saturday morning, while Vanessa is driving dogs to Colorado, once again on her day off with no pay, she gets another text from Cotton at 9 a.m. saying is that he has Otis at the shelter and needs to leave him there right now. She replied that the shelter is closed and she isn't there, but she would try to get someone there. 20 minutes later, he's texting Vanessa asking why he isn't being helped. Evidently, he got someone's attention, and he must have made a big ruckus because volunteers and staff were inside cleaning kennels, and those dogs are loud. 15 minutes before the shelter opened, Cotton pushes Otis's leash at an employee and tells him he is surrendering his dog. They ask politely if he can wait until they open, but no, he could not. Volunteers didn't know who he was, but they knew he was exceptionally rude to staff and just left Otis there with no goodbye. Poor Otis. That little dude must have been so confused. Why did Chris expect to make everyone go out of their way for him? And his family, I'm sorry, for him and his family. Because they had plans out of town that day? Because he's the director of the Parks and Recs? Or because his family loves the shelter? So Otis is surrendered to the shelter, and the staff begins to care for him as they do for all neglected animals that have had no vet care. They give him vaccinations, warmer, flea protection, neuter him, feed him, and board him for 4 days. Well, the minute Otis is available for adoption, Cotton lets Vanessa know he wants to adopt, no, he doesn't want to, he wants to adopt Otis. So this happens occasionally. Families change their mind and dogs get adopted back out to their owners. Vanessa explained, as she does to every patron who has a change of heart, that the shelter has now spent about $300 on Otis's care. Most people, when they hear this, will give an extra $50 to try and help meet the cost the shelter spent on their pet. Chris did not do this. He paid the flat $150 and took Otis back home. We, the taxpayers, paid for the vet care of the Cotton's new pet. The director of the Parks and Recs, which currently includes the animal shelter, used our shelter to save his family money after attaining a dog that was not his to take from Oklahoma. All of this while his family claims to love our animal shelter. This is how much respect Chris Cotton has for your city and your animal shelter. This is why there were 58 pages of grievances. Chris Cotton is not what is best for Salina, and it's definitely not what's best for our animal shelter. I too love our animal shelter. I love our animal shelter by taking photos for the website whenever I'm able to. I love the shelter by teaching my grandchildren to be responsible animal caregivers. I love the shelter by fostering dogs and puppies, even the shoe-eating ones. I really loved being at the shelter. It was a wonderful place to go and do whatever you were capable of to help animals get their best life possible. Great people worked here, with a great manager, a boss with a staff that loved working for her. The day was not bogged down by drama and negativity. It was a crew of people, both paid and volunteering, who worked so hard at amazing things every single day. Now, because of toxic leadership, we have lost yet another great employee at the shelter, as well as an untold number of volunteers, donors, and grant dollars. I'm disappointed that nothing has been done to investigate the real issues regarding the personnel issues with Ms. Cowie. I'm beginning to think that the roots of the toxicity go much deeper than any of us have ever imagined. I've recently become aware of a $150,000 lawsuit brought against the city of Joplin, Missouri because of the mistreatment of a city employee by Chris Cotton while he was the Parks and Recs director there. Were you or Mr. Schrag aware of this case?
Yes.
And so why was he hired for our city knowing he had that type of behavior?
I'm not prepared to go into a personnel matter. There was a
Once again, I
background
understand it's
check and
private. I
nothing.
get it. How much more money is he going to cost Salina treating others the way he does? I've heard some commissioners speak of retraining Cotton to make him better at his job. How many jobs does he get to do and do incorrectly, and we have to suffer with retraining? Why did we hire somebody that wasn't capable of managing our parks and recs and shelters successfully the first time? How many towns and hardworking people does he get to damage? Why was Ms. Cowie not given the opportunity for retraining? Why can Cotton use the shelter as his own discounted veterinarian? We have so many questions that are always followed by so much silence on your part. Commissioners, I'm asking you once again, on behalf of many, many Salinans who cannot attend this meeting today, to investigate the true cause of Ms. Cowie's terminations. None of us will trust you until you do. I appreciate you letting me go over my time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else that would like to address the commission?
Kim Cunningham, 683 Georgetown. I didn't prepare anything because I really wasn't going to speak until I heard her speak. I guess I'm going to speak as the vice chairman of our local animal advisory board. I'm extremely concerned about where to go here. We've lost Vanessa, who was very powerful as a leader. We've also lost another employee at the shelter who was also involved in our in our quarterly meetings. We recently voted that we were going to be bringing something to you as commissioners that we wanted to see in Salina, and then we're going to obviously put a stop to that at this time because we don't have the leadership to be able to continue that. But the other thing I'm really concerned about is I do think this needs to go out from under the Park and Recreation. I was a part of the group, and we have been fighting to get our shelters put up, I guess, at the Barclay Park. And I was very heartsick that I was up there shortly after Vanessa's resignation, and all of a sudden, these things have gone up in Barclay Park. Timing is incredibly, don't know what I really want to say because I want to be nice, but I just think the timing of that, why couldn't that have been done? The cement has been up there all summer. And it wasn't until after her resignation that the nice sheltered pieces that are going to supply some shade, and now the summer is over and we might not need it, they are being done. As a citizen here, I was born here, I was raised here. I know most of you. I voted for most of you. I came back to this town and I raised my children here. And I'm growing old here. And I want to encourage you, at the end of the last, I wasn't able to be here, but Joe mentioned that he wants an investigation to find out what is it going to take to get our shelter out from under the Park Recreation. And I just want to encourage that that's followed through on. And we need to get passionate people in there, and we need to move on. Dogs are going to die here, guys. They're down 2 employees down there. They're not letting us any new volunteers because we have no leadership. I'm concerned. I'm very, very concerned as a citizen. And I just want this to get moving in a forward place, and let's get on with what we need to do with our business and saving our dogs and our animals and build this back up.
Ms.
Thank you.
Cunningham, I agree. I've reached out to a couple different agencies that might be able to help provide professional consulting on alternate organizational structures. And the first question I raised is actually something that Ms. Cowie advocated with me, and that is
Yes.
kind of a privatized approach. We're
Yes.
also focused on advertising the vacant position. However, and unfortunately for the interim director, I've asked her to kind of stick it out for a little while so we can get the consulting information
Yes,
back and make that
and
decision.
I understand
So-
we need to put those things into place.
I also
Working in
reached
an
out-
area that, when you're short, and they were already
Yes.
short to begin with,
Yep.
I'm concerned about the health of the employees that work down there. I'm concerned about their emotional state.
We're actively trying to identify tasks that can be
Good.
supplemented by, someone, obviously an animal control officer is hard to replace, so we're trying to identify other tasks
Very
that they
much
can supplement. And we are actively advertising the animal control vacancy.
Okay, who's handling the, you may not know this, but I do have a question on who's handling the new volunteer applications. Because I wasn't available to do that prior to, because I was involved in some other things. Are those being looked
I
at?
actually reached out to the Friends of the Shelter, and I understand they meet on Monday evenings, which
Okay,
creates a
so
conflict.
they're gonna be
but
looking over those?
Well, I'm trying to coordinate with them to have that conversation. So
Okay.
I did that shortly after Ms. Cowie resigned, and recognizing the value of the volunteers, recognizing the shelter's dependence on the volunteers, and trying to coordinate. But we've yet to identify a time that we could have that meeting and that conversation.
Well, and we work free. We don't cost any money.
Well, in all honesty, one of the things we looked at was converting volunteers to a paid position, but there's fair labor standards concerns that prevent us from doing that. So we're trying to identify what our options might be.
Well, and there is a time lag because the application has to go through, we have to all be checked out and
Right.
criminal and all that kind of stuff we do in today's world. So that takes some time too. But I really am concerned that, I think we need to reach out to the people that we have still down there and let them know that we do care, and we don't want any
That-
more of them to go.
That was my-
Please rest assured that we recognize the value of the volunteer organization, and we're working very hard to, we're taking the steps that we can to re-engage with them. I mean, there's been a lot of emotion and passion here.
I
Let's
agree.
turn that into something positive for the next director.
Yeah, and that's what I want to see, is let's move on and do what we need to do, and the other stuff settle out where it's supposed to settle out at, wherever that is.
Yeah, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but my intention of reaching out to the president of the Friends of the Shelter was to do exactly that, underscore the point that we recognize the value and trying to figure out the best way to move forward.
Best way to
So-
move forward with them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the commission? We'll move on to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time. I believe we have none. The consent agenda. On the consent agenda, I would like to remove number 6.2. Are there anything else that anyone would like to remove? It leaves only the minutes in this case. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Here. Second?
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Item 6.2 is a resolution to appoint members to the Business Improvement District Advisory Board and Art and Design, and the Disciplinary Advisory Board. I'd just like to inform the commission that I made my selection without some important information from the bid district. And that was their recommendation for Dagny Stromberg, and I just failed to get that piece of information, so.
No, we failed to provide you that piece of information, Mayor. I indicated that I would try to track that down and speak to that a little bit. In my role as deputy city manager, I got to watch these appointments from a distance. I've been schooled on this one recently. You should have in front of you a copy of Ordinance 91, 94, 41, and there's a highlighted section that kind of spells out that the uniqueness of the BID process. And towards the bottom of that highlight, it indicates the mayor shall make appointments from individuals recommended by the board of directors of, says Downtown Salina, Inc. It should be Salina Downtown, Inc. Provided, however, that the mayor may reject any recommendations and request new recommendations. And so historically, past practice, it may vary in terms of how we get that information by way of letter or by way of email, but staff then would forward expression of interest forms to the governing body as a whole with a notation that what SDI's recommendation was. We were aware of the recommendation of Dagny Stromberg, but failed to communicate that by way of the expression of interest forms. And so Lee Leglighter reached out this afternoon, pointed out that that recommendation had been made, and with Shandy's help and others, I was able to track down what was and wasn't communicated and recognize we failed to communicate to you that recommendation. So in light of that, and I'll work with SDI and Penny Bettles and others to, because you've got the BID board, you've got the SDI board, you've got their ability to recommend appointments, and we're kind of in the middle of that in terms of ratifying that recommendation. So we'll staff that through a little bit more in terms of whether that's a one-step process or a three-step process. But for today's purposes, staff failed to point out their recommendation, and you've proceeded without that vital piece of information.
So is the cure for this to have a motion to amend this to substitute?
Actually, you should also have an amended resolution 187609 at your seat that reflects Dagny Stromberg in place of Mr. Michael.
So we just need a motion on the amended resolution?
As long as you're clear what the content of that resolution is, but we tried to provide you an amended resolution.
Mr. Mayor, move, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say,
You
if
need to-
anybody's got any other questions of Mr. Schrag. We're ready for the motion.
Okay, I move adoption of resolution number 18-7609, appointing members to the Business Improvement District Advisory Board, Community Art and Design Advisory Committee, and the Disciplinary Advisory Board and Housing Authority.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. My apologies to Ms. Stromberg, but we're glad we straightened that out. We'll move on to administration, 7.1.
Item 7.1, second reading ordinance number 18-10979, changing the zoning district classification from R Single Family Residential District to I2 Light Industrial District on property addressed as 1332 Woodland Avenue.
I believe we have not received any information or feedback since first reading. Is there anyone that would like to address this on second reading? If not, we'll bring it back up here for action. Is there a motion on 7.1?
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve ordinance number 18-10979 on second reading.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We'll have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Hay?
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Mayor Ryan?
Aye. That item passes 5-0. 7.2.
Item 7.2, second reading ordinance number 17-10879, changing the zoning district classification on a 19.38 acre tract of land located on the east side of Markley Road, north of Magnolia, from A1 agricultural to R1 single family residential.
This item has also received no input since first reading. Is there anybody that would like to address this ordinance on second reading? Bring it back up here for action. Is there a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion we approve ordinance number 17-10879 on second reading.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. There'll be a roll call on this as well.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Hay?
Aye.
Commissioner Hodges?
Nay.
Commissioner Hoppick?
Aye.
Mayor Ryan?
Aye. That item passes on second reading 4-1. 7.3.
Item 7.3, resolution number 18-7607, extending the compliance deadline as ordered by resolution number 18-7576 related to repairs or demolition of a dangerous structure located at 439 South Phillips.
Hello, Sean Pilcher, building official with the city. This, like she said, this is a consideration for an extension for the dangerous structure repairs for 439 South Phillips. Given your blue sheet here, gave a little bit of background on what has transpired so far. City Commission adopted resolution 187560, setting a public hearing date on June 4th. June 8th and June 15th. The resolution was published in the Salina Journal. June 11th, copies of the resolution was sent certified mail to the property owner, Dennis Collier. Was delivered on June 14th. On July 16th, City Commission had the public hearing. A report was presented regarding the conditions at 439 South Phillips Street. Mr. Collier did not attend this public hearing. City Commission adopted Resolution 187576, ordering demolition or repairs to the structure located at 439 South Phillips, and to be completed by October 15th. Resolution was published in the Salina Journal on July 20th, and then July 23rd, a copy of the resolution was sent to Mr. Collier and delivered on July 25th. We've been in contact here and there during this entire process with Mr. Collier. As it kind of goes through the notes there, on October 1st, staff performed a site visit and confirmed that no work had been completed yet on the demolition of the structure, and a permit to require the repairs for demolition, no permit has been applied for or issued. On October 7th, city staff called Mr. Collier to remind him of the upcoming deadline as stated in Resolution 7576. At this time, Mr. Collier indicated that he would need an extension, and he now plans to demolish the structure, and that demolition should be completed by November 1st. Mr. Collier has obtained the services of a contractor and has applied for a demolition permit, and I think those wheels are in motion. That permit should be issued very soon. I don't think there was too much hold up there. City Commission action, staff has identified the following alternatives. Approve Resolution 187607, setting a compliance deadline for November 1st for substantial completion or demolition or repairs, and authorizing staff to proceed with demolition if the owner fails to comply. Approve Resolution 7607 as indicated in option 1, but fixing alternative times for substantial completion or demolition, authorizing staff to proceed with demolition if the owner fails to comply. Or number 3, you can deny the request for extension and direct that Resolution 187576 adopted July 16th, 2018 be enforced. Staff recommends option 1. And I believe Mr. Collier's here to speak as well.
Any questions for Mr. Pilcher? Mr. Collier, would you like to address the commission?
Good afternoon. We would request an extension for this particular property. We had quite a time finding a contractor that would originally fix the foundation issue at this property. It was built in 1925. It has a shared driveway. We had several issues with that. But in speaking with the contractor that accepted the contract, we've decided probably the best solution is to tear the property down and go a different direction. So depending on the weather, we think we need an additional 2 weeks to finish the demolition of the property on Phillips Street, according to the contractor. So,
Questions for Mr. Collier? I'm glad they called you. All right,
thank you.
Bring it back up here for, well, is there anyone from the public that would like to address this issue? Bring it back up here for action.
Well, first of all, I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Pilcher and to Community Development Services staff for going the extra mile and not only sending registered letters and newspaper notices, but going the extra mile and reaching out and making the phone call. So sometimes I think we get a bad rap for not having good customer service, so I'd really like to call it out when I see it. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And with that, if you're ready to entertain a motion, Mayor Ryan.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor Ryan, I move that we approve Resolution Number 18-7607, setting a compliance deadline of November 1st, 2018 for the substantial completion of demolition or repairs, and authorizing staff to proceed with the demolition if the owner fails to comply.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item passes 5-0. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next resolution.
Item 7.4, resolution number 18-7611, setting the date for a dangerous structure public hearing to consider whether a certain structure located at 622 South 9th Street shall be condemned and ordered demolished or repaired.
Mr. Pilcher.
This is a new one. We had 8 of these go through in July, as I spoke about earlier, and this is a new one that has come up on our radar. This is a resolution setting a date for a public hearing. Kansas statutes annotated sections 1750 through 1756F provides the authority and the required procedures that cities take to eliminate dangerous structures. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow the owner's agent, lien holders of record, and occupant of the property to appear and show cause as to why structures should not be ordered to be repaired or demolished. An inspection of the structure was performed by building official and building inspectors using criteria listed in Chapter 31, Article 6 of the Salina Municipal Code. Details about the condition of the structure and the supporting documentation will be provided at the public hearing. The action before the City Commission on October 8, 2018 is solely for setting the date for the public hearing, conducting the hearing, and making determination regarding the subject property will occur at a later date as set by the City Commission. If you adopt this resolution today, October 12th, first publication will go into the newspaper. October 15th, we'll send a certified copy of the resolution to the property owner and all identified parties, including lien holders. October 19th, the second publication will be set, and October 26th, the public hearing will take place. where the city commissioners will consider resolution to condemn in order to repair or removal of the structure located at 622 South 9th Street. Staff has identified the following options. Adopt Resolution 187611, setting November 26, 2018 as the public hearing date for a dangerous structure located at 622 South 9th Street. We can postpone consideration of Resolution 187611 and provide further direction to staff, or we can decline the public hearing for the dangerous structure. Staff recommends option number 1.
All right, thank you.
I kind of drove by and looked at this. Has this building had a fire in it at one time?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Looked like it on the back. And it's currently vacant?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I just saw a light on, so, okay.
I just have a general, as not specifically for you, Mr. Pilcher, but does our strategic plan have anything other than goals 1 and 3 here that would address just generally accepted aesthetic quality of properties in the city? I mean, I know it's a branding, it's a vision statement type of
Right.
of perspective, but
Yeah.
and while it sort of fits under number 1, I mean, it has nothing to do with my decision on the issue, but do we have any other reasons we can fall back on for wanting to address blighted property?
I'm trying to call it up as we speak, but I do believe, codes and quality are addressed. I can't give you the exact verbiage of what it says. But, as part of our general strategic planning conversations, code enforcement, housing quality has been an ongoing conversation. If you're looking for a particular goal and how that's worded, give me a second, and I might be able to tell you.
Or is that something that would even be, it's a rhetorical question, to be appropriate for us to include in a future
Certainly.
version of our strategic plan?
Certainly. That's right in the wheelhouse of what strategic planning is about. It sets priorities, and from those priorities come budgeting, whether it's demolition of more structures, whether it's code enforcement, whether it's rental inspections. There's a number of things that might flow from that being a strategic plan initiative. And what I see is clean, attractive, and inviting, quality of life, attractive and well-maintained. It'll be evident that good housekeeping and high community standards are valued. Getting into Kenwood Oakdale Park. Respectful of our heritage, adaptive reuse. Create a community of mixed use, quality development and redevelopment, highest quality services, maintain growth and development policies that are updated, and that's the essence
That first
of
one
it.
sounded pretty good.
But if your question more broadly is this an appropriate issue to take up with strategic planning? Certainly. It's been discussed at previous strategic planning sessions, and as I said, that strategic plan kind of drives our priorities and everything from budget to staffing to enforcement.
I guess maybe what Commissioner Davis asked, and should there be something in the strategic plan that addresses dangerous structures or safety of our citizens, because that's what it really kind of falls under more than the mixed use, I guess, is, because it falls under the state statutes, and that's the reason we're actually doing it. So.
Right. No, it certainly could, if you want to be more specific in the plan.
Make a note to save that for the strategic planning session. Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Pilcher on this item? Anyone from the public like to address this? We'll bring it back up here for action.
Mayor Ryan, I move we adopt resolution number 18-7611, setting November 26, 2018 as the public hearing date for dangerous structure located at 622 South 9th Street.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-4 will pass 5-0. 7-5.
Item 7.5, resolution number 18-7608, authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with ABC Creative for the sale and purchase of playground equipment for Hawthorne Park.
Good afternoon. Yes, this afternoon, the Parks and Recreation Department requests approval to execute the agreement with ABC Creative for the sale and purchase of playground equipment for Hawthorne Park. From research, it appears that the existing playground at Hawthorne Park was either installed in the late 1970s or early 1980s, and it has surpassed its life expectancy. In June, the Parks and Recreation staff accepted RFPs for the project. 8 firms responded to the RFP, and 18 submittals were reviewed by Rick Martin, Parks and Recreation Superintendent, Brett Lamer, Certified Playground Safety Inspector, Brett Huffman, Certified Playground Safety Inspector, Ron Dankebridge, and other members of the Parks and Recreation staff team. The playground concept, titled Explore the Cosmos by ABC Creative, was the top-rated playground by the Park Supervisory Team and also won the popular vote by the Parks and Recreation staff. The playground has a very good variety of equipment and has definite curb appeal. ABC Creative was very attentive to staff needs and the desire to have something very eye-catching from the approach south on 9th Street. ABC Creative made great use of the space available for the new playground and did a custom design for the city of Salina. This is not a generic off-the-shelf playground, but a wonderful artistic piece that will encourage play. This project was headed up by Brett Lamer, and he is here tonight to answer any questions that I may not be able to. Staff is requesting approval of this purchase. Stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Cotton?
Does the current playground equipment remain?
No, sir. It will be
will come
removed.
out.
It will be
Okay.
removed. Yes, sir.
Are there any ADA compatible components within this particular design?
This specific, my name is Brett Lamer, by the way, I don't know. With this, we were trying to stay within the confines of what's already there, aside from the swings. And so we decided not to go completely all-inclusive, but there are ground level features. I think there was like 6 on this one that they will have something to do, but it's not all-inclusive, so they can't do everything. But there is like 5 or 6 ground features with this playground, so that helped in our choice. That was one of the requirements, was grading that.
Gotcha. And the reason I'm going that direction is I'm following up on a comment that a citizen gave me many months ago, and I think I'd reached out to Mr. Cotton at that point. Have we gotten compatible swings installed in any of the parks? Like, I know Sunset was one that was targeted, and I just kind of wanted to follow up on that and see if that had been completed.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. And then I think the final thing is I'm awfully glad to see this playground getting updated, but at what point will we, it would be really nice if we had some sort of a list in terms of our prioritization. Obviously, this is one that's in need, let's get it changed out. But rather than, kind of doing these piecemeal, if we at least had some sort of a philosophy or a consensus or something in terms of what our priorities are going to be in terms of the, the neighborhood playgrounds and whatnot. I think that, for me personally, that would be helpful for making funding decisions in the future.
I think we agreed to that in the study session conversation.
Right.
This predates, this whole RFP process and budget
Right.
process well predates that. So the steps coming out of that study session conversation were a tour, which we're working on scheduling, and that was intended to give the city commission a better sense of all the parks. And then we talked about trying to prioritize neighborhood parks and regional parks based on the park master plan, as well as that rubric that we shared with you in the study session. So
Right.
I can't give you a target date when that'll be complete. That's a pretty large undertaking, but we are working on it.
To that end, actually, we've been working on a prioritization of our playground specifically. When I came on 5 years ago, I got involved in playgrounds a little bit. I just recently became a CPSI like a year and a half ago. And one of the jobs that was tasked to me was prioritize. And so I took what our former superintendent, Bob Ash, had, and he had a basic version. He had years if he knew it. He had some, if they had any issues that he knew ahead of time, if they were ADA accessible, and he had that. And so we've been building on that. It's not completed yet, but each year we're trying to attack the worst ones.
yeah.
And so if you've noticed in the last couple of years, we've changed quite a few. This one was next on the list. So we have like the top 10 done, but after that it gets a little gray. And so we do have a list, that a prioritized list, issues, stuff that maybe it might not be the oldest playground, but it had issues or something like that. This one was just next on our list, and so that's why that's what this one is. But we are working currently on making a grand list. That way we can go off, and we've made a huge dent in just the age alone. When I first made my list, our average age of playgrounds was in the 20s. It was 21 years of age, and what we've learned, or what I've learned since becoming a CPSI, is you can't really put a lifetime on these things, but typically when they're out in the weather like they are, especially Kansas weather, 15 years is getting to the point of you need to start moving on. And since we've been doing this, we're down to our average ages at 13. So with these, it'll push our age down below 13 at this point. So there is a list. We are working on it, and eventually we would like to present it to you guys as well. So.
Thank you very much.
And I know this was budgeted under the sub-CIP, but I'm guessing this checks a box off of our Parks Master Plan
Yes, sir.
deal.
Yes, sir.
Obviously, so when we get to that, so, okay.
Other questions for staff? Thank you very much. Anyone like to address this item from the public? Bring it back up here for action, please. Is there a motion?
Yep, I move move approval of resolution number 18-7608, authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement with AB Creative for the sale and purchase of playground equipment for Hawthorne Park.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item will pass 5-0. We'll move on to 7.6.
Item 7.6, consider change order number 3 to reduce the crosswalk overhead structure cost, thereby increasing the available contingency for the downtown streetscape project number 70012.
Mr. Stack.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to sit over here because I'm going to try to show you some pictures on the screen there that hopefully help illustrate this a little better. It's quite a change order that we feel like is worth going through and worth pursuing. And so I'll just kind of go through the background a little bit on that. When we first bid this project in March of this year, basically, we looked at the costs and were able to kind of go through all the different alternates and construction costs, and most we felt like we're in line and we're part of part of the project, and then in the case of all the alternates, the commission awarded all of them, and so we've been working to try to do the whole project in the next year and a half. So it's part of it's done this summer, and people have gotten to see some of that. But in the meantime, we've been looking at the overhead structures. They were definitely expense, had some expense to them with the project, and we looked at possible ways to value engineer those. The contractor thought, there's some ideas they had that looked like maybe we could save some money, and so they investigated those ideas, and we worked with our designer, HDR, to say, okay, is this a good alternative, or is this, a feasible approach? Are these some things that we could look into further? And so we did that with the designer and with the contractor, and they were able to come back to us with some possible savings. So I thought I'd just run through those a little bit. Really, the first one is this column. If you look at that column, it's basically, the design was a steel column with kind of a wrapped architectural precast panel. Architectural precast panel meaning a concrete panel that's wrapped around it and sectioned and made to look like kind of the aesthetic look that we have downtown with our new project. Here, I'll show you these intersection monuments. This is an intersection monument that we're going to have at the corner of Mulberry. Kind of the idea is the Art Deco look. You'll see the United Building, you'll see the top of the steeple, you'll see a lot of the tops of the buildings that kind of look like this when you look at downtown. So that was the idea that the designers and architect came up with as far as for our, kind of the aesthetic approach to downtown for the nodes, which would be the entrance gateway monument. These nodes are a little smaller, they're kind of interior. And then trying to make these columns match that as well. So that was, the idea was to make that all go together. And so the contractor said, well, what would happen if we would just make those a concrete column that looks exactly the same, basically, except without the steel with the wrapped architectural precast. So we thought it made pretty good sense to say, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Why wouldn't that work? So we worked that out with the designer and the contractor, and they were able to reduce the cost of those columns, a total of $60,000 or $3,750 approximately per pole. We have 16 of these poles, so each one of there's 4 per structure, and there's 4 structures, so 16 downtown. So it's not a huge savings, but it ended up over 16 of them. It ends up to be a pretty good number. So that we thought that was a good idea, and then we thought that we'd bring that to you for approval today. We talked with the city manager about it. It does help us with our costs, and we reduced kind of our contingency on this project because we feel like it's an expensive project. We thought we could save some money in some spots, and this was one of the places we thought we could. So that is the column. The second option with this, the savings, are the metal panels. So this picture shows you the metal panels. This rendering has these panels. There's a more open panel here, as you see on the left, to a more closed panel as you go towards the center, then back to a more this actually goes left to right. So it's open on the left, and it goes to a more closed on the right. And in reviewing the panel design with the contractor, really those are neat aluminum metal panels. I mean, they're aluminum metal panel. We actually have an aluminum metal panel structure in Salina. It's out on South 9th. That is an aluminum structure with it's actually the punched aluminum out there. So it's weathered well, it works well. It's been a neat architectural piece that's been put on a lot of buildings and things around the U.S. So we feel like it's the kind of the real wow factor of some of these overhead structures is this metal panel. So basically they take a metal panel and then they cut this pattern in it, and the pattern is here. So you'll see that it's a Art Deco pattern, again, kind of trying to mimic the tops of the buildings downtown and the look of the downtown Art Deco. I guess a lot of different things, but this was what we settled on with the architect and the designers, as well as we ran this through the CAD committee, the BID Design Review Board, quite a few open houses. Had 3 open houses with the public and 3 study sessions. So we feel like kind of working through this process, we vetted this through quite a few different groups, and we felt like it was something that people had some input on, and we settled on, and felt like this was a good design. Well, the thing with this design is it's a neat looking design, but it does have a lot of cutting. So when you take a metal panel and then cut a lot out of it, that is part of the process. But the more cutting you do, the more it costs. And so in looking at that through this project and process, we felt like. And that A panel was really expensive, which the A panel is the one here on the left. And it is just a lot of really small cutting, and it's harder for them to do, basically, is the bottom line, which of course means more cost and a lot more cuts to the panel. So we said, is that look really lost with, going with the B panel, the C panel, the D panel? Those are, progressively open to more closed panels, and we felt like, if you actually look at the kind of the layouts from the street view, from people driving down the road, are you really going to notice it a lot? We felt like it was a fair question to ask. So the designer thought this was a good alternative design that saved quite a bit of money, reducing the A panels. To clarify that a little bit, the Campbell Plaza which is this one here. This is one that's lower, more visible. You're still gonna, you're sitting there watching performances. It still has the 8 panels in it. So we still have that on the Campbell Plaza, but on the overhead structures, felt like that maybe, this might not be as really as noticeable, still has the wow factor, still looks, I wouldn't have really noticed, but that's, I'm not looking at that as much. Now that I know about it, it's hard to tell exactly what, those panels in the middle there, right here, I believe, those are pretty tight, very small cut panels, moving to this more open panel, all the way out to this really open panel. And I thought, well, that's, from what Jim and the contractor and the designers and the architect thought, that is feel like a fairly good design. What is that going to cost, and how much could that save us? So that's the nature of this. That's why it's taken quite a while to look through how long this is, or what are the options and how much could this save us. And it's significant enough to where we had a fairly small contingency on this project, which we are fine with that. We feel like, a large project, you can work to make sure you hit your budget. It's just, unless you find something really crazy, you try to figure out ways to make your budget. You have tie-ins at everywhere that we tie in, we've had to do a little extra curb, or a little extra sidewalk, or something to tie in, but it's pretty minimal. So we feel like so far so good. And this actually gets us back to a little bit of margin for our contingency, which is fairly normal in our projects. And this was a way to save money on the structures, give us some contingency. We may not even have to spend it all, but at least it gives us a little more margin if something does come up on the project. So these two items were fairly big contingency items that actually help us with our contingency. So we're bringing those to you today to further discuss. And lastly, I guess the cost of these, a total of $122,000 in savings that these could save. And still, we believe the concrete columns, we don't believe you'll see a difference really in those at all. You wouldn't notice them. Put the steel with a wrapped concrete around it, or a concrete, they're going to look the same. Whereas, these panels, if you got up there and were walking right next to them, if these were at the field house, you'd notice it. You're going to be walking right next to those at the field house. You notice the pattern, you notice the punch pattern. But these are, 16 to 30, or let's see, they're 10 feet tall, so 16 to 26 feet up in the air, basically. So we just don't feel like, is that detail worth $62,000? We don't believe it is at this point. That's our recommendation at this point. And we will stand for questions.
Questions for
Or
Mr.
sit
Stein?
for questions, I guess, right here. Jim and I are both been working on this, as well as your city manager, or interim city manager. Thank you.
Does the lighting options for these change any?
Not at all. That's a pretty exciting feature, is it still has the LED color. That's been a big topic of discussion, because the light bars are bigger, so we're having to figure out a way to attach these a little differently. But yeah, that doesn't change anything that we've approved.
Does the entire span have to be lit the same color? Do you have the options of changing the colors across the span?
I don't know. That's a good question. The lighting, the lights will have.
It's a different topic.
Basically, it's a 4-foot light. So they put 4 foot, all these 4-foot lights through there, and then there's a controller that I know that controls them. So, but I'm not sure if it can control lights differently. I can sure ask that, but that's a good question. This new LED color lighting is definitely new for us, and new even for a lot of the people that have looked into this over the designers and the contractor. It's exciting, but it's new, so I'll have to check on that.
Did these changes go through the design review board or anybody?
Nope, they did not. Design review board is with the downtown design review board. No, they have not.
I guess my question, I hadn't thought of it, but might couple with that, was any consideration in clipping those little wings off the side? Well, they just look
they're
out of place to me, but I'm not an architect, I'm not an artist, I'm not a designer, and I would defer to the opinion of those who are, but it just looks like they crowd up against the building.
If you can zoom in near the column.
Yeah, zoom in like right here.
Yep.
That thing right there?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are actually shorter than they are today. They do not go as close to the buildings as they did before. So they do have an overhang to them, but they're not near as far as they used to be. Let me see if I can find the picture of the old ones. Okay, you can see those really went quite a ways over the old, towards the buildings. They were pointed actually and farther away. So we're probably about half that distance now with this overhang on this design here.
I don't know, any architects in the room? Or artistes in the room? I may be the only one who does. It just looks like they crowd up next to the building
That
there.
actually came up with the review board, and they preferred because we showed them both options, the one that extends beyond the columns, the one that's shown now.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's about 8 feet, I believe, approximately, where the old ones were around. They were further than that, 15-ish or so.
So if they had a part in the other, shouldn't this go past the design review board? Shouldn't we, before we make this decision, shouldn't they take a look at it to make sure?
If you as a commissioner open to the change, we can certainly take it to the design
Yeah.
review board. I think it is a change order that we were bringing to you first to verify, and if we need to go back to the design review board, we certainly can.
Yeah, the design review board was, it was more of a, when we went to them, it was presentation and did they have any questions? They did not have any questions, so they were happy with what we came up with. So this would be
That was on the previous with all 4 panels.
correct. Yeah, well, and that's, they're looking at kind of the whole project in general. So we had bricks, trash cans, everything. And so it was a lot to take in. So I can't say they said, those structures look nice, but did they know there was 4 panels or 3 or whatever? We didn't get into that kind of detail with them, but we sure can.
When do they next meet? Anyone know?
Typically, is it Thursday, every other Thursday in the month? And it's only if they have something to even talk about.
I think it is next Thursday. We're going to have another
Thursday
project to
this
take
week,
to them.
Packet for next Thursday.
We're not
I
making
just
this
read
meeting.
We just got the packet
Right.
for next Thursday.
I don't know that we would necessarily want to get ahead of you and have you hear that we're changing this design. I mean, what would be helpful today is if we can get a sense from you whether you're receptive to those changes. We can certainly
I'm
then staff
receptive
it
to going
through.
from 4 to 3, but it'd be nice to have those who usually make these decisions, at least have their opportunity to weigh in, and if they decide they don't want the little ears on the side, we could probably save another $50,000, but.
Consider it instructing us to take it to the design review board if that's your desire.
That would be mine.
We also ran this through the Community Art and Design Committee as well. We met twice with them, so they were amenable to the design, and we talked with them as well. I'm not involunteering to do more work on that, but, we can. They pretty well helped us get to where we were today, so we feel like what we have is what they recommended at the time.
Could we consider the change order with the review of the design board?
Yeah, I think it's subject to
appreciate
review and
that.
approval of the design review board. I think you certainly could.
Anybody from the public like to address this item?
And
John Blanchard,
artiste.
1117 State Street. Just a quick question. I really don't have any preference as to 3 panels or 4 panels. I prefer no panels, but that's a personal preference. My question is was there, when you knew that you were going to have to do some value engineering, instead of going in and changing 4 different panels, was there ever any consideration of maybe only doing 2 or 3 of the overhead structures? And that's just my question. Was that ever a consideration? Because I do know the furthest north one, I get that some of these connect plazas and they serve a function, but other ones don't so much connect plazas as much as they are intersection crossings. I think the 2 interior structures would probably be sufficient to give that wow factor. And in my estimation, 50%, that'd be about half. So anyway, that's just, I would ask that maybe if you're going to look at changing the design, maybe instead you look at having 2 instead of 4. Thanks.
As a little bit of clarification, this task that staff's taken on is follow-up with the original approval that was made. So I don't have the wording in front of me, but staff indicated that they'd go back and look for opportunities for savings. But, the scope conversation, 2 versus 4 structures was part of that original approval. I don't think we ever went away from that thinking that what we were tasked with was that broad. It was more opportunities to get the savings in the 2 to 5% range to help with the contingency that we were trying to protect, not broad scope changes.
Is that still is that a possibility to start the discussion about going from 4 to 2? I mean, I was looking here, and it looked to me that already in the process, we were within about $35,000 of using up our contingency, and I know that 2% was a pretty aggressive contingency amount for a project of this scale and with the age of the infrastructure that we were going to be dealing with. So, this gets us back up to we'll have about $150-some thousand in contingency at this point. And with that being said, is there any way that we could revisit the number of overhead structures as a whole?
With respect to the contingency, it is aggressive. We had that conversation at the outset.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason it was aggressive was to try to fulfill the scope as it was indicated. This is also part of the streetscape plan that was approved as part of the development agreement for the Star Bond project. So in addition to any discretion that we might have, we're looking at essentially renegotiating that Star Bond development agreement. And I'd have to defer to Jim in terms of the status of our contracting with the contractors and the way that scope was described and awarded.
The 4 structures were awarded. They have been released as far as the overhead structure itself. Started fabrication on those. Of course, the columns are part of the change order, so they have not been approved to do those, as well as the panels. In addition to all of the aesthetic things, we had some concerns about the openness of some of these panels. If any of you have put a plastic model together and you have pieces and parts in tabs, just looking at these panels, we were concerned that maybe there was too much cutting and that the panels may have some structural issues in the winds that we experience here in Salina. So we had some additional modeling done on the more open structures versus the more closed one. The more closed one that has all of the tiny cuts passed with flying colors, but it did exert some more lateral pressures from the wind. So in addition to I figured it up, 234,000 inches or 19,000 feet are basically 3.5 miles of cutting just in those A panels, and we're paying for it by the inch. So when you're paying stuff by the inch, saving over 3.5 miles, it was a big deal. We did not consider reducing the number of structures because the downtown blocks are longer than your normal blocks. They're 750 feet long instead of 500. And you're correct in saying that the overhead structures mark some of the plazas, but they more significantly mark the pedestrian crossings at the mid-block. And the whole idea of making the downtown more pedestrian-friendly, calming traffic, slowing them down, that is a huge billboard saying, hey, pay attention, there's people here. So we thought that we needed those safety features on every block rather than just the interior blocks. So we did not consider reducing the number of structures when we were looking at this.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to address this?
I'm behind on this, so bear with me. Marcy Moberly, 300 East Wayne. And so basically, they're $500,000 of our tax dollars, right, for these is the cost we're looking at? Yep. Okay, and so what are the benefits? Are just safety, public safety?
Well, there's aesthetics. There's quite a bit of aesthetic considerations for everything downtown, from
Right.
the types of brick, the types of paving, the types of plants, and then these overhead structures are kind of the most dramatic or the wow factor as far as the biggest, most memorable item in the new downtown.
Well, and then I would add to that, they're part of kind of a negotiated star bond project that's intended to redevelop the downtown, and so the projections of the star bond project are $150 million of downtown investment. The city's portion on the streetscape in its entirety is $12.5 million that was part of that development agreement, and the streetscape is an attached exhibit to that agreement.
And I don't mean to interrupt you,
No,
Ms.
not at all. Go
Moberly,
ahead.
but.
I just wanna learn.
No, I think that, I wasn't quite sure I heard you correctly when you said how much the overhead structures are going to cost. They are about $1 million total. They run about $250,000 each.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
with these changes.
Is there no way to do that with just a street light that comes out across that kind of fits the same aesthetic without having to spend such a phenomenal amount on that? Has that ever been considered, or is that?
Certainly, as the streetscape design was put together, that there were a lot of those conversations. I mean, this is the culmination of, I don't even know how many years of deliberating on this design.
And the brightness of the LED lights, are they like sonic LED lights, or are
No.
they're calm?
They're more mellow. They're not neon, real flashy neon, but they are colored. And it's my understanding there's 4 colors available, but it's all yellow, or it's all green, or it's all blue, or it's all red. It's not, you can't have a bunch of, like the Christmas lights where you have some of each.
So is there any documentation that shows that having these so often will decrease the amount of accidents or pedestrian safety? Or is there, that we need to have quite so many of them, or that's just been what's decided so far?
There's nothing specific as far as a calculation you can make as far as traffic calming and speeds and accident rates. It's more anecdotal for other places where they've been successful.
We're narrowing the road to a certain extent. These neck down the road, which makes it easier to cross, basically. So you don't have to cross 4 lanes, you just cross 3. So that's the idea, where you spend less time on the road, and cars that are constricted more typically slow down. They don't feel like they can drive as fast. On a highway, you can drive really fast because it's open, but when you've got large columns on the side of the road, in this case, these are going to be large columns. It'll help you to. The idea is it makes people slow down, and speed studies typically prove that.
Thank you. And it just seems like a lot of money for taxpayers to pay, so I just want to make sure that everybody really thinks about, how our money's being spent, because that's a huge amount of money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jenny Solden, 902 Gypsum Avenue. As far as the columns go, must have been a reason they were starting with steel encased in decorative concrete. So I'm concerned that if we just go to concrete, is there less of a stability factor there, or is there more of I would ask you to consider that whether or not that would be as safe. And then as far as the overhead panels, you said that the way they would cut those is exactly like Dawn Silver Lining on South 9th. And I see where they were going with Dawn Silver Lining, but I don't think that they achieved it with that process. I drive by there, I can't see the trees inside. I just see ugly mesh. And I know that's a personal opinion, whether it's ugly or pretty, but I think that it could have been achieved some other way. They could have met their goal, and I don't think they did meet their goal, so I'm concerned with these. Like you said, they're 16 feet in the air at least, and you're driving down the road. I know it's going to be pedestrian, but is it really going to make a difference to the aesthetic? You might consider going with just the most open panel all the way across. I understand wanting to connect the Art Deco everywhere, and I think that would look nice, but you could save even more money by going with one, and people wouldn't be squinting at the end trying to figure out what the pattern is. So those would just be my recommendations to consider. Thank you.
I'm no artist, but my one observation on the Dawn Silver Lining is traffic's running parallel to it versus, perpendicular to get the benefit of this design more so maybe.
But even when I'm next to it and looking straight through it,
Yeah, no,
I don't see it the way I think the artist intended for it.
And I'm not going to argue with you. I understand your point. I just, being head-on with this piece versus, driving by.
Good point she brings up. The Dawn Silver lining is a punched pattern. And so we did look at the punch pattern. We thought that might actually save us dollars and maybe you could get the same look. But the punch pattern didn't save us any money. And this is a water jet or a laser cut type pattern, and it is more pronounced. So you're not going to miss this. That's for sure. These are cut and they're very pronounced. And for some reason, yeah, with the same supplier from the field house, we just couldn't get didn't feel like they gave us a good estimate or we couldn't get a good price from them. It was actually going to cost us more to punch them. So we feel like, well, this is the contractor's got the best solution for cutting that we researched. We did research different alternatives to that as well, but came up with this approach, the laser cutting and water cutting.
And Dan, do you want to speak to the structural integrity of the concrete versus steel?
Oh yeah, that's a good question too. I mean, it was a steel structure before, and they're basically connecting. The foundations are fairly similar, and they're connecting steel to steel. The contractor felt like the concrete is a little more stable. It's heavier, but they run through the footing calculations and the design of it, and it works well. And actually, the concrete is a little heavier and a little more stable in that case, whereas the steel, you could hit steel, and since it's in pieces, it's steel with wrapped concrete architectural precast panels. The concern was, those would maybe have a tendency to, if somebody did reckon them going really fast or something, those could break up more so than a concrete column. So that was a little bit of a safety concern. That we thought, well, the concrete is these concrete columns are typical, bridge columns. They're typical. They're very, very common, very stable, very sturdy, very structural. They're not going to fall over. They're not going to break in half or anything. So it's just the steel is good as well. It's just we feel like this was maybe a better solution especially since it was cheaper and looked the same.
Anyone else from the public like to address this item? We'll bring it back up here for action.
I just have two questions.
Sure.
And I may have missed a final design meeting in there somewhere, but it seemed like the depictions of the lighting on the panels earlier on show much more varied options than just lighting up the whole thing in one solid color.
I don't remember. Let me look. I think we had some colored lighting in this. I think in this presentation, but we didn't have any. I don't see it. I don't see where we had any actually on the structures. So I apologize. I don't know if we did a rendering of that. So yeah, basically that picture of the structures with the light on it, that you have to just kind of use your imagination to picture that. Those will have colored options, like Jim said, the four colors.
We did discuss that with the CAD committee and the design review team, whether you light it from the front or light it from the back.
Right.
Makes a difference on what you see. And they overwhelmingly preferred lighting it from the front, which is what we've shown in our renderings.
Yeah, that's what this shows, basically lighting it from the front and lighting onto the panels. Instead of lighting it from the back where you'd see the metal structure more, the truss structure, we're not as, it's not as nice looking as these panels.
And I guess I'm kind of conflicted. I'm trying to do the commissioner part of me, which is just address this issue here and not listen to the personal part of me. And after being at Topeka this weekend and seeing just very simple arches across their downtown street, this looks like a lot for that street. But that's me personally, and trying this position to not put my personal artistic taste out there as the public desire. But I would also wonder about going from 4 to 2. But again, we're talking personal taste here, and I don't know if that that cow's so far out the barn that we can do anything about it, but,
Well, we're talking about
We're-
personal taste, but we are talking about taxpayer dollars too. And I understand, from my earlier request to revisit whether or not, this is the best possible use of $1 million and $1.5 million in our community at this time. I understand there's no interest in returning to that discussion, but, at the same time, going from 4 to 2, and frankly, seeing the beautiful facades of the buildings that we have downtown, those arches are lovely. I mean, the crosswalk structure, the pattern on the, of the cuts on the metal panels, they're lovely. They're absolutely lovely. Just speaking, and I realize I've made this point before, but just seeing the downtown without anything whatsoever and being able to take in the variety and the beauty of the architecture that we have downtown, to me, is a very powerful, excuse me, argument for revisiting their need at all. I understand it's too late at this point, but.
Mr. Stack, test your technological visual. Is there an artist rendition? 'Cause I realize this picture shows the street the way it is now. Is there an artist rendition of all 4 of these with the new street underneath of them? Because this picture probably doesn't do the arch any justice. I don't know if you have one in your repertoire there. But.
Well, I'm looking at the bottom of that structure. It has that's going to be a brick column around the bottom here. And I thought that's maybe too tall of a planter, and I'm trying to think if those planters are superimposed on what we had. I don't.
Those planters, I think, go away.
I think those are the old planters?
Yeah.
Okay. Nope, we don't have that. I have pictures of the planters in this.
Or any picture with all 4 of the columns?
And I don't recall any. I think they were intended to be a rendering and not a full.
Why are you just a rendering of it? Okay.
But I think they were just intended to be representational. We didn't task them with doing all 4 of them.
Yeah. And I do believe they will be an iconic part of downtown. I hadn't thought about 2 versus 4, or I think at one time we even thought there was maybe 3 instead of 4, not knowing there was one on the north side. So I'd have to give that some thought. But I definitely think that they will be an iconic part of downtown, mainly when they're lit at night. I think with the additional streetscape, they'll really add to the downtown. So.
I think the original process was very open, and public got a lot of input on what their preferences were. So I see no compunction to change the scope.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. I think the only difference is when we did most of that vetting, the old structures were still in place. And of course, I've lived here nearly 20 years, so I've never seen Santa Fe without them. So my point of reference was quite different from someone who may have been here.
Well, I
before
want
they
to
put
correct
up.
one more thing that Commissioner Hodges said it's too late. It's not too late. Under contract, we have to pay for the work that they've done. They've done some work removing the old structures. They've done some work rehabbing the existing footings. They've started construction of the spans. They haven't completed any of them. And they're working on the sample panel for us. We wanted one sample
mock-up.
before we approve it. So we have one panel that's hopefully being constructed
Yeah,
right now, but
so-
it's not too late. And I didn't want you to get the false impression that I had told you that.
Well, that
We would just have
corresponds-
to pay for the work they've done so far and then come to terms on what the unit price would be for the remaining work, so.
And that corresponds to the construction contract. We're also under a contract by way of the development agreement and the transferee agreements with each of the community partners. And I have not had a conversation with them about, reducing the number of structures. But by way of the development agreement that we entered into, we committed to the streetscape design that has been, bid out. And I think the transferees could say that they proceeded with their hotel project, alley project, Old Chicago, master developer property acquisitions based on our agreement to construct the agreed-upon streetscape. So if, I'm not saying that that can't be undone, but that would be renegotiation with all of those parties.
And
I expect.
informational question, I'm just can't remember right now. There's one north of this one that's depicted in the picture here, yeah.
There's one between Ash and Elm.
There's
That would be
that's the
new.
new one. Yeah, that'd be the new one for the alley, basically the alley crossing. It doesn't necessarily connect a plaza, but it connects the alley,
mid-block
which we
crossing.
believe is going to have some, and the Lee lofts as well. So we believe there'll be some more activity up there than there used to be. So that's the 4 blocks.
Is that about where, is that actually on the corner, or is it at where the Lee lofts are going?
No, it's going to be located
Mid-block.
real close to where the existing crosswalk is.
Yeah.
There was a big tree right there on the west side that was removed. That's where it's intended. It will line up with the alleyway or the connection on the back side or the north side of the alley. Real close, but it's intended to be a mid-block crossing.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion? Are we ready for a motion? And I'm assuming that there is consensus that we run this by the Design Review Board. Is there a motion
How would
to?
how do we want to make that? Do we just want to run it by them first and then bring it back? Do we want?
I don't know why we couldn't approve it.
I think
Subject
I
to
would say
their
subject
review.
to,
Subject to
approval by
their-
the Design Review Board,
Consent.
authorize the change order.
Is there a motion?
It's being written as we wait.
Mayor Ryan, I move we consider change order number 3 to reduce the crosswalk overhead structure costs, thereby increasing the availability of contingency for the downtown streetscape project number 70012, subject to approval by the Design Review Board.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Well, I would just like to once again thank staff for, making it clear that it is in point of fact not too late, and that's, like I said before, for the reasons I listed before, that's why I just can't support going forward with the crosswalk structures. But I really appreciate the time of the commission and the time of the staff to discuss it and answer those questions.
If there's no more discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
That item will pass 4-1. Development business? We have none. Other business?
Got one thing we'd like to add or mention.
Yes, sir.
About 4 o'clock this afternoon, we did issue a press release due to the weather. The accumulation of rainfall in this area is particularly west of town. Mulberry Creek is expected to crest at midnight tomorrow, about 3.5 to 4 feet above flood stage. So we are intending to close North 9th Street, Old 40 on the west side of town, State Street on the west side of town, and Old 40 on the east side of town about noon. But we're planning to start closing those streets at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And with the anticipated flooding in the north side of town, we actually are going to employ our sand gap HESCO bags right there at Thomas Park and actually construct those to keep the water out of North Salina. So it's and that's based on the current storms. They update those. The National Weather Service updates that information every 4 to 6 hours. But based on the information we have, things will be fine. We want traffic to get into town unimpeded, but by 8 o'clock we are going to start closing those roads, and people may need to find alternative routes home. And we expect that to be about a 24-hour closure, that not until sometime Wednesday afternoon, will the waters recede to a point that we can verify there's not any road damage and allow traffic to use them again.
Curiosity, is the new hotel under construction in the area that's
It is in the area that
That'd be
is
flooded.
expected to have high water, but I'm not sure what their elevations are, so.
All right.
And Jim, you mentioned the sandbag gap on 9th Street. There's also one on State Street. Will you be closing that?
There are 3 or 4 other sandbag gaps that we are going to monitor closely. In the press release, you may notice, or I've had one question already. Cloud Street near Cherokee, which is on the west side of town, is also expected that it may need a closure sometime tomorrow afternoon. And that is because the local drainage and rainfall and drainage from the south part of town may not be able to escape to the north side of town because of the high water from Mulberry Creek. So it actually backs up water, and we may experience some internal issues with Cloud Street, West Cloud Street tomorrow. But if we get any additional rainfall, North Ohio Street, north of the levee may also experience some problems. That the ditches are really full on Stemmel Road and stuff right now. I've got some action photos that are. It's really saturated and continuing to rain, and the stuff west of town is headed our way. So.
Mr. Mayor, I just got one other thing. This is from Mrs. Fisher. Do we have any type of an update or anything on the firm that we contracted for the city manager search?
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I don't have a formal update or any type of status as to interest. I can forward out the timeline, the tentative timeline that the firm sent to me based on the direction when I went back to them 2-3 weeks ago. If you've seen the posting, if you haven't seen that, I can include a link to it in my update to you, or the sharing of the timeline that Art Davis created, but they are looking at a first review date as the 22nd of this month, and then to be able to bundle the information and send it back to you, but that full table timeline is in there. Can't remember all the specifics of the in-between, but the full timeline with all of their time, your review, the activities in between, anticipates an offer to be made around the beginning of December.
All right.
So if you'd like, I'll go ahead.
We're kind of
and
headed
forward
towards
that
the end
out
of the
to you.
month.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
sure.
And I am assuming it is going to stop raining. Mr. Kowash, there's some kind of, staff is providing some kind of update to the community on the downtown progress on Wednesday. Is that right?
Yes, a progress party is planned for nearing completion on the south block of the streetscape project from Mulberry to Walnut. 5 o'clock in Spillman Plaza. There will be a few brief words, some refreshments, some punch and some ice cream. There will also be some photos of Salina back in the day with streetcars and buggies and those kinds of things to compare with what people have now. So we encourage the public to attend, hopefully Wednesday afternoon at 5. Sun will be shining, be nice again.
Oh, we hope so. And there's a good part of your work able to be seen, so I think that could be interesting and exciting to people. Any other items under other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.